What a qualifying session. Absolutely brilliant. Love those in the wet. So pleased they went ahead with it because it would have been quite easy, I think, to make the call to just write everything off and do everything on Sunday morning. But they didn't. So full credit to everybody for making that happen. Liberty, the teams, the FIA, Ross Brawn, all those calls had to be made and they were the right calls. It was a brilliant qualifying session. We don't see them like that very often. I keep thinking back to Monza 2017. I said in the video last night that I thought Max might do Lewis on this occasion, but it was still Lewis and Max. And guess what? The margin Lewis had over Max, 1.2 seconds in Austria, exactly the same margin that he had at Monza in 2017 in that other really, really wet session. I don't know what that means other than that it was a great lap from Lewis. Watching with Lewis, he was just sublime in the way he was manipulating the car, getting little flat spots on the car so he could accelerate where other drivers were just understeering or teetering on the edge. Beautiful power application. And of course, not using any of the conventional racing lines, just finding the grip, as indeed Max Verstappen was. But for Max in the Red Bull, it looked to be a harder time. The Red Bull just looked to be an edgier car. When Max wanted to put the power down, it was always a little bit of an abrupt moment for him. And I think that was the difference. I think it was a great lap for Max, given the car he had, but it was just a superb lap for Lewis Hamilton. And, we saw Lewis yesterday effectively taking a little bit of time out in FP2 when they went through the car. They found something small in the setup. But more than anything, this was a moment for Lewis, I think, to be just getting himself together in case there was going to be this wet qualifying. And that was the lap that he was able to produce. I also questioned whether or not Valtteri was going to be able to get near Lewis. He was very quick from time to time, but ultimately I think it did come down. We didn't see that much of Valtteri on turn 4, sadly, on TV, so I shouldn't really be too emphatic about this, but we saw a couple of times Valtteri in turn 4, and he was indeed doing something very different. He was going in wide, trying to use the grip on the outside, but mid-corner is where Lewis is systematically able to manipulate the car to get it straight so he can get that accelerative line, whereas Valtteri at that moment still had understeer on the car, and that was the difference. He doesn't have that same mid-corner manipulation. And Lewis is so good at being patient. He is the most patient racing driver in the world in terms of waiting for exactly the right moment to put the power down and to put it down at exactly the right rate. So it was Lewis again from Max. I did say also that I thought Carlos Sainz was due for a big lap in the wet, and that's what we saw right at the end of Q3. Fabulous lap from Carlos Sainz. No real surprise, I think, because McLaren's such a drivable car now, and both drivers full of confidence. Lando Norris also really quick whenever he was out too. So a great lap from Carlos Sainz, really good to see that. The guy that I didn't mention, and I'm kicking myself for it, is Esteban Ocon, because he was really good. Think back to 2017, how good he was in the Force India in the wet in qualifying. I think he qualified 5th at Monza. Of course Esteban is good in the wet. He's got this tremendous feel as well. And I've been saying ever since he went back to Renault that I think alongside Daniel Ricciardo, he is going to look really, really good and increasingly good as the year goes on. So a great performance from Esteban Ocon as well. Valtteri, as I say, did the job I think that we all thought he was going to do, there or thereabouts. He'll be a bit detuned by that because this was a day when Lewis just could show all that flair, all that brilliance, and why he is, of course, the 6 times world champion. Another good lap too from Alex Albon. We talked about that and that lovely finessey touch that he has on the medium and high-speed corners, but that served him well in the wet today, so he really deserved that. And the other guy I didn't mention, should have, again kicking myself, is Pierre Gasly. I thought he was really good, consistently good in all 3 qualifying sessions. And I say kicking myself because I remember there was a race at Suzuka, Japanese 3000, when he was doing Japanese 3000. It was very, very wet, and he was really quick in that. And I should have remembered that, and I didn't. So, Windsor, not very good. The other big shock for me was how poor Racing Point were. Where was Sergio Perez? Didn't even make it into Q2. And Lance Stroll never really looked anything like as convincing as he did in the wet in the Williams, for example, at Monza in 2017. And whether that's just, I don't know, I don't think this is the car. I got to say, I don't think that's the Racing Point. I think the Racing Point is a very, very good racing car. And I think Zach Brown touched on it. He was chatting, doing an interview in the lull when they were wondering if there was going to be any qualifying today. And he said something along the lines of, well, we've got a good pair of drivers. And I think that makes up for quite a lot. And of course, he's absolutely right. You look at Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, and then you look at Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll, and you look at really difficult, very wet conditions on a circuit which is really difficult with the curbs and everything else that's going on, and the sprays being contained. No surprise that we saw two really good drivers at McLaren getting the result. I'd love to have seen, as I said the other day, I'd love to have seen Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz in the Racing Points and see where they'd be. I think they'd be a lot further up than they were. So disappointing day for Racing Point, but you know, you can't have everything. They've got the money that comes with Lance Stroll, and Sergio Perez is a good sort of driver that isn't going to give Lance too hard a time, but nonetheless he's quick enough to keep him on his toes more or less and to keep the team going in the right direction technically. But what they don't have is a really, really quick racing driver at Racing Point. And I think we saw that today in those conditions. But if it was a disappointing day for Racing Point, what was it for Ferrari? These were the conditions that should have nullified some of the problems they've got. Top speed, lack of grip, this or that. They got Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel, for Pete's sake. And they were still really, really slow. They actually, I mean, Sebastian Vettel got the most out of the car. I think that V style of his, as I suggested yesterday, worked pretty well in the wet because he was able to find grip fairly naturally when he wasn't locking up or going wide or doing this or that. Yeah, he got in a lap, but it wasn't really quick. Charles Leclerc looked completely out of it. He didn't look confident. He didn't look on top of the car. He didn't look as if he could do anything with it. Actually, there was one moment when he did actually get the tail out and he had a bit of oversteer and looked quite good. And you thought, oh, well, he's timing it all to the last lap. But it never happened. I don't know. I mean, for me, this is a huge, huge wake-up call for Ferrari, more than anything else that's happened over the last 6 months. To have both drivers uncompetitive in the wet around Austria means that there is something fundamentally wrong with that car. And I don't know how long it's going to take to fix it. I hope it's soon, but this is a serious problem. And finally, what about George Russell? Brilliant lap, as we thought. Fabulous to make it into Q2. Congratulations to him and everybody at Williams for making that happen. That was a real racing driver's lap, as we kind of suggested yesterday. And if you want a little bit more Williams, we're talking to Jack Aitken too. After he drove the Williams in FP1 yesterday, jumped back into the F2 car. We speak to Jack from just outside the track, and he talks about what it's like doing that over the same Grand Prix weekend. Very quick, nice guy too, Jack Aitken.